The first thing you notice is the smell, not of sewage or smoke, which are fairly constant companions in a 14th century village, but of onion, earthy, vaguely sweet, and absolutely everywhere. You are standing in a dirt-packed square in northern France. The sun is diffused behind a grayish sky, and there's a chill in the air that makes you pull your woolen shawl a little tighter, even though it itches like you borrowed it from a sheep. You're here, supposedly, to learn how taxes worked for peasants like yourself. But let's be honest, you probably won't make it through this day. Still, let's try. And hey, if your eyes start to close, that's fine too. This is, after all, boring history for sleep. Before we dive in, take a soft moment to like and subscribe. It tells the YouTube scribes in the algorithm towers that you'd like more sleepy stories like this one. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from. And what time is it there? Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. Your boots squelch slightly in the damp soil as you step past two chickens conducting a heated argument in clucks and feathers. Ahead of you is the manor house, not a castle, mind you, but the humble two-story wooden and stone seat of the local lord, who is not particularly fearsome. He mostly just wants onion. Yes, onions. You see, in this tiny stretch of Europe in the 1300s, currency is a strange and shapeless thing. Most villagers have never seen a coin, let alone touched one. Instead, you trade what you have: barley, wool, eggs, the occasional goat, if you're feeling generous or slightly desperate. But today is onion day. You sling a woven basket over your shoulder, packed with your finest alec, dirt still clinging to the roots, and head toward the tax shed. That's not a joke. There is a tax shed. It leans slightly to the left and smells like damp parchment and salted pork. A man with a ruddy nose and far too many keys hanging from his belt greets you. He's the reeve, the peasant who tattles professionally. He doesn't say thank you. No one says thank you for taxes, especially not an onion. The reeve jots something down in a ledger using a quill that has seen better days, possibly better centuries. The ink is faint and splotchy, but official enough. Beside your name, which has been creatively spelled in 3 different ways over the last 6 years, he writes, paid 32 onions, fresh. One historical fact we know for sure: in many medieval villages across Europe, onions were indeed used to pay taxes, tithes, and rent. Their long shelf life, pungent aroma, and dual use as food and medicine made them oddly valuable. So next time you cry while slicing one, just remember you could be paying off last year's field use. Obscure tidbit: in parts of England, peasants would actually braid their onion payments into decorative strands as a subtle form of protest art. Kind of like but historians still debate whether the lords actually used all the onions or just buried them in some tax-time onion hole. You leave the shed a lighter on both onions and dignity. You pass the blacksmith, who is hammering something that vaguely resembles a horseshoe or a very unfortunate spoon. He nods at you, expression unreadable beneath a thick layer of soot and disillusionment. You nod back, because that's how socializing works here. It's nearly midday. Somewhere a bell rings a single dull clang that means the Lord is awake. The taxes will now be sorted, stored, and likely forgotten until someone needs to pickle something or impress a visiting cousin from the next manor over. You walk slowly past the fields. A woman is singing to her goats again. The goats do not appreciate it. A child runs past you barefoot, holding something suspiciously egg-shaped. You decide not to ask. Back at your cottage, you place your now empty basket beside the hearth and sit on a stool that's been passed down through 4 generations and still wobbles like a drunk on market day. You did it. You paid your onion tax. You're free for now, and you're very sleepy. Coincidence? Maybe not. The next morning arrives in the least poetic way possible. Someone's rooster is having a breakdown. You jolt awake on your straw mattress, blinking up at the thatched ceiling that still harbors a small spider you've named Bernard. He waves one leg, possibly a greeting, possibly territorial. The fire has long gone out, so the room smells like cold ash and damp wool. You wrap yourself in a cloak that's more whole than fabric and open the crooked wooden door. Outside, the village is stirring, which in medieval terms means someone is already yelling about cheese. Today isn't a tax day, thank goodness, but it is your turn on the rotation to walk up to the hill pasture and count sheep. No one is quite sure. The sheep certainly don't care, but tradition is tradition, and that's how society avoids chaos. You trudge past the same chickens to reeve, and make your way toward the outer fields. It's here, halfway up the slope, that you pass something interesting: an old stone marker partially buried in moss. It looks like nothing special, but local legend claims this was where onion disputes were settled. Yes, onion court. Apparently, if a villager accused another of shortchanging their onion taxes, they'd drag the issue here, slap the accused with a leek, and let the reeve decide. The penalty, usually more onions, sometimes a public apology. Once, a 3 de fast from Garlet. You sit on the rock to rest. The wind tickles your head. Birds chirp lazily in the hedgerows, sounding like they, too, are half asleep and just trying to get through the day without another leek trial. From your perch, the village looks small but orderly. Thatched roofs, smoking chimneys, wobbly fences that never seem to keep pigs out of anything they weren't supposed to be in. You notice the manor house again, its chimney puffing smoke. That's how you know the Lord is awake, or someone set the place on fire. Statistically, it's fit. The major historical fact here: peasant life was governed by something called the manorial system, where land and labor were exchanged for protection and justice, the latter of which often came with a side of mild injustice and a dash of arbitrary punishment. You finally reach the sheep. They regard you with the blank, superior stare of animals who understand they've already won. You count them. 18, you count again, 19, then 17. Then you give up and write about 18 on your wooden tally stick and move on with your life. Weird cultural tidbit. In some regions, peasants named their sheep after saints, hoping it would improve wool quality or prevent thievery. Apparently, St. Agatha the sheep was particularly soft and mildly judgmental. No one knows if it worked. Historians still argue over whether naming your livestock increased their resale value, or just gave people something to shout dramatically when one wandered off. On the way back, you pass the village baker's cottage. A delicious, slightly burnt smell curls from the chimney. You peek inside. He's asleep, face down on the table, flouring his eyebrows, a loaf cooling beside him that looks like it could dent a helmet. You take a mental note to come back later and buy a slice with what? You're not sure. Maybe more onions. By evening, the sheep are asleep, the wind is gentler, and you're back home beside the hearth, listening to a pot of something vaguely stew-like bubble over. You did your duty. You counted things. You avoided legal trouble, but now the spider has built a second web, which you choose to interpret as either a good omen or a zoning violation. Outside, a bell rings again. This one's softer. It's the bell for nightfall. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them just long enough to blow out the candle. And now, the house is still, the kind of still that hums in your bones, the kind of still that almost makes you forget. Tomorrow is leek inspection day. The morning greets you with a fog so thick it feels like the air forgot how to be transparent. You sit up slowly on your straw mattress, brushing flecks of hay from your cheek. Bernard the spider is suspiciously absent from his usual corner, probably off to check his second web. Real estate management waits for no one. Outside, the fog curls like old wool around every tree and rooftop. You pull on your cloak, which now smells faintly of soup and goat, and step into the white silence. It's leek inspection day. And yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Twice a year, every peasant who has been allotted a row in the community garden must present their leeks for quality review. The logic, allegedly, is to prevent disease from spreading across the crops. In reality, it's an excellent excuse for the bailiff to remind everyone that even vegetables can be judged. You walk down the narrow path toward the communal patch, past the same chickens, and spot a few neighbors already queued up. Each holds a bundle of leeks like bouquets, some fresh and proud, others wilting like they've heard the rumors. You take your place in line behind Gilbert, a man whose eyebrows could be legally considered mustaches. He nods. Big fog today, you nod back. Big leaks today, he grunts. That's the most exciting conversation you'll have all morning. The bailiff eventually arrives, hooded and grumpy, with an expression that suggests he once smiled during a thunderstorm and never forgave himself for it. He holds a short stick and a leather-bound list of offenses, which mostly include mold, insufficient bulb, girth, and suspected sorcery. You hand him your leeks, he sniffs them, he pokes them. He looks at you like you've personally offended his ancestors. Then, with the solemnity of a knight bestowing a title, he nods once, and stamps a mark on the back of your hand using something that may or may not be actual ink. You're approved. You're free to go. You try not to look too pleased. Today's big historical fact. In the late Middle Ages, agricultural inspections were often part of communal life. The feudal economy depended so heavily on small-scale crops that even humble vegetables could cause disputes, fines, and occasionally lawsuits, usually shouted across muddy fields and involving impressive finger-pointing. And your obscure tidbit: leeks were believed to ward off evil spirits when worn around the neck. This led to at least one recorded incident of a man wearing threes and still getting possessed. The villagers decided it must have been a dosage issue. Historians still debate whether the inspections were genuinely effective or just a feudal form of public shaming with bonus produce. After your victory, you reward yourself with a visit to the baker, who has finally regained consciousness. He's offering dialed bread, which is basically modern. You sit on a rock near the well, nibbling the crusty edge, and watch the fog lift slowly over the thatched roofs like a curtain at a very slow, very muddy opera. A child skips by singing something that rhymes leek with sneak, and it's not great. You decide this is enough excitement for one day. You've survived inspection, eaten stale bread, and learned more about onionage and vegetables than you ever thought possible. Back home, you feed the fire, check for Bernard, and stretch your legs by the hearth. Your knees creak like old barn doors, but at least they still work. Mostly outside, twilight dips the sky into deep blue ink. You are warm and tired, and your leeks are safe. The village rooster is asleep on the roof, which means you, miraculously, get to wake up on your own terms. Your limbs ache pleasantly from yesterday's garden work. A loaf of coarse bread sits on the table where you left it, slightly nibbled at one corner either by a mouse or the ghost of your grandmother. You whisper a polite thank you just in case. Today, the air is different, lighter, crisp. The kind of morning that smells like the beginning of something very uneventful. You make your way toward the main road, where the market has begun to unfold in its usual sleepy chaos. Baskets are being thumped down. Goats are being discouraged from love affairs with carts. A girl is trying to sell apples that still have leaves attached, for extra realism. And there, near the far end, is the official collection booth place, where the Lord's clerk receives produce, records inventory, and sometimes drops ink on his boots. This isn't a tax day, but it is a tally day, which is somehow worse. Tally day means you must report what your land has yielded so far this season, not give it. Just confess its existence so they can charge you later. You stand in line behind a man holding exactly 1 carrot. It's not clear if he's proud or ashamed, possibly both. When it's your turn, the clerk raises 1 eyebrow, as if measuring your soul for honesty. So, what have you got? You rattle off your numbers. 6 sacks barley, 1 row onions, 2 rows leeks, 3 chickens, maybe 4. The clerk pauses. Maybe. You shrugged. One of them wonders. He scribbles something down in a way that feels unnecessarily judgmental. You watch as your entire food security for the winter becomes 5 lines on a goatskin parchment that may or may not get eaten by mice in the scriptorium. Still, at least you're not the guy behind you holding 2 eggs and a jar of optimism. The major historical fact here. Tally days were common across feudal Europe, used to update manorial records and plan future taxation. These records, called censuses or extents, helped lords keep track of which peasants might try to mysteriously lose a few sheep around rent season. Your weird tidbit. Some villagers used tally sticks made of hazelwood, notched to represent each item. These were then split in half lengthwise, 1 half for the peasant, 1 for the manor. That way, neither side could cheat without the natches misaligning. Early medieval fraud prevention. Before blockchain. Historians still argue whether peasants really tried to underreport their onions, or if the scribes just had very poor handwriting. With your civic duties complete, you wander over to the weaver's stall. She has spinning wool and humming a song that might be about laundry. It could also be about heartbreak. It's hard to tell with medieval lyrics. You buy a pair of woolen socks. They're mismatched. She shrugs and says, fashion. You pass by the church, whose bell tower leans slightly to one side like it has had a few too many communion wines. The priest waves, holding a goose. It's not explained. Back home, you sit in the doorway, socks on, legs stretched out. A breeze carries the smell of onions, fresh-cut wood, and something like cinnamon, but probably isn't. You close your eyes. Somewhere, the chickens have made up. It's a good day. You'll probably forget it by morning, but in a life like this, that's a blessing. You wake up to the faint sound of distant bell ringing and the soft, rhythmic creak of a cartwheel with an opinion. It's not a work day, not officially, but it's a go stand in line and hope you don't get volunteered for something kind of day. The sun is already up, filtering through the tiny window in your wall like a sleepy spotlight. You stretch your arms over your head and yawn loud enough to scare off whatever small woodland creature was definitely nesting in your firewood stack overnight. You pull on your boots and open the door just in time to see a man carrying a sheep on his back like a woolly backpack. You nod respectfully. That's commitment. Today is inventory review at the mill. Not the fun kind of inventory where you count barrels of honey or leftover bread. No, this is the kind where the Lord clerk cross-references how much grain UV submitted with how much flour the miller has produced. It's not glamorous, it's not thrilling, it's barely comprehensible, but it is mandatory. You make your way down the muddy lane toward the mill house, passing the usual suspects. Chickens who now seem to be in couples counseling a child poking at a dead frog with a stick, and an elderly man shouting at a fence. The mill itself is a creaking, water-powered contraption that groans more than your uncle's knees in winter. Inside, the air is thick with flour dust. You sneeze before you even cross the threshold. The miller, a round man with a flour-covered beard and one suspiciously sharp eye, greets you with a grunt. He's already mid-argument with the clerk, who is trying to determine whether a cart and a half of grain turned into about 1 sack of flour due to poor yield or a suspiciously leaky sack. You, wisely, say nothing. The historical fact of the day. Lords often required peasants to use the lord's mill to grind their grain, charging them for the privilege. This was called, and it was less about fairness and more about revenue. Using a personal hand mill or was sometimes forbidden unless you wanted a visit from the bailiff and a fine that smelled like injustice. Obscure cultural tidbit. Some villagers believed flour mills could harbor spirits, especially mischievous ones who tangled ropes or jammed millstones. Millers were occasionally suspected of witchcraft, partly due to their isolation and partly because no one could ever understand how their math worked. Historians still debate whether millers were actually skimming flour or just incredibly bad at measuring with sacks that had holes in them. Eventually your turn comes. The clerk checks your grain report. The miller nods or grunts or wheezes in the appropriate places, and a tally mark is scratched into a wooden board. You're dismissed, not with gratitude, but with the silence of bureaucracy doing its best impression of a black hole. On your way out, you pass the spinning wheel. It's idle now, but later the village women will gather around it to gossip while pretending to make thread. Yesterday someone claimed the priest had a secret cheese stash in the bell tower. Honestly, believable. Back home, you check your onion patch. A few are peeking up shyly through the soil. One is sideways, probably a metaphor for your entire life. You water them gently, because one day they'll pay your taxes, and maybe, just maybe, your legacy will be they grew good onions. You decide to skip the market today. Not because you have anything better to do. Your other option was sweep the floor with a broom made from questionable twigs. But because there's a rumor going around that the minstrel has returned. Yes, admit, he comes through every few months with news from distant lands, songs with too many verses, and trousers tighter than his morals. And while his stories are usually half-aching, they're still better than staring at the goat for entertainment. You head toward the green, where a small crowd is already gathering. A ring of children sit cross-legged, mouths full of stale bread. Someone's brought a mug of cider. The reeve is suspiciously absent, which means the minstrel might actually be allowed to speak for more than 4 minutes. He strums a chord that sounds like a chicken falling down a staircase and begins a tale of kings and battles, of fire and fates entwined. You listen, half interested, half asleep. The sun warms your face. The grass is soft. The song is predictably long. This is where you learn today as historical gem minstrels weren't just musicians, they were information channels. In a world with no printing press and no Twitter, these dusty wanderers were your newsfeed entertainment app and conspiracy theory subreddit, all rolled into one. Lords tolerated them. Priests squinted at them. Villagers adored them, mostly because they made Tuesdays more bearable. Weird tidbit. Some minstrels were paid not to perform. Towns would pay them to leave quietly if they were too loud, too bad, or too romantic for local sensibilities. It's the medieval equivalent of uns. Historians still argue about how much truth was hidden in minstrel songs, whether they were coded histories, political satire, or just excuses to rhyme sword with gourd. Halfway through the performance, the minstrel pulls out a puppet. It's crudely stitched, smells like moldy cabbage, and is voiced with a falsetto that could scare crows. The children scream with laughter. You chuckle once, mostly out of social obligation. After the show, the minstrel passes a hat around. You drop in a small onion. He looks at it, nods solemnly, tucks it into his bag like it's the finest gem from the East. Back at your cottage, you make a weak tea from crushed herbs and stare out the window. A gentle wind moves the grass. The goats have escaped again. One is on the roof. You do not react. You finish your tea, you patch a sock. You hum the minstrel's tune and realize you don't know how it ends. That's fine. You're not in a hurry. You've got all night. It's raining. Not the kind of cinematic rain that softly taps on rooftops and makes poets sigh into their tankards. No, this is a slow, muddy, sideways drizzle that turns paths into soup and cows into statues. You open your door, stare at the gray mess for a moment, and shut it again. Congratulations, you've just made the only reasonable decision of the day. Inside, the fire is low, the bread is hard, and your knees are whispering tales of arthritis yet to come. It's the perfect kind of morning for indoor chores. Or, more accurately, for pretending to do indoor chores while staring at the wall and contemplating the philosophy of soggy wool. You settle into your chair with a bit of mending. One of your socks has become a philosophical experiment in how many holes still make it a sock. Bernard the spider has returned. By the way, he's now in the corner nearest the door, building a web shaped suspiciously like a map of the village. You choose not to ask.